Hello guys, welcome back to our chart tutorial series, and in this first video after the introduction we are going to start with working with some types of charts. And for the first video we are going to look at the Chart.js library. So here is a page known as Gantalela. It's actually a bootstrap admin template by Colorlib. You can find it at colorlib.com, and it is known as Gantalela Alela. You can also go, I think it is also on GitHub. You can just try and check or find out about Gantalela Alela, or you can go to the Colorlib page. But the best way is just to go to www.colorlib.com, and you can download this wonderful bootstrap admin template. So in this template we actually have data being represented using the Chart.js and the Morris.js and the eCharts libraries. So we'll start by the Chart.js, and here we have in this page we have some 6 types of charts that we are going to look at, starting from the line chart, the bar charts, the radar, donut, pie graph, and the pie area chart, or it's also known as the polar graph or the polar chart. And for each data set or for each graph we can choose which data set to view and which data set to hide, or which item. For the cases of the pie charts and the donut charts, we can choose maybe to view like 3 items or even 2 items, how they compare to each other. Maybe we'd like to view the dark gray and probably the purple, and then compare it with the light gray. So you can do an array of things with these charts. You can also compare for the bar graph or the line graph one particular item by clicking on the legend, that particular item on the legend. So that is it. The next thing that you're going to look at maybe is to go to the code, but before we go there, here's the representation of the same data using smaller areas, and our pages are powered by Bootstrap. That is how we get to have like these small columns that are stacked next to each other with a getter space of around 30 pixels. I don't remember the getter space between 2 columns, but they have a specific number of pixels in between them. So these are the bar graphs and the donut and the other type of chart that we saw earlier, but here they have a smaller representation, and this is achieved using Bootstrap. And the good thing with Chart.js, and as is the case of other libraries, they are responsive to the size of the page. Here we can view that when the screen gets smaller, it actually adjusts and fits the entire page. And when you are at medium size, then they also adjust and actually fit the page to occur as you'd like to see. So I think that is it. Now let's go to the code. So I've opened up the Chart.js document, which is an HTML type of document, and it has a lot of actually this code from the top up to here. This is actually the header code, which contains some information such as this one here for actually making our page responsive, and there are some items that are being linked here, including the fonts and the bootstrap. Then after that we open the body, then we create a navigation and the left sidebar, which I've collapsed the code here. This is the code for the navigation and the left sidebar, so I can just collapse again. Since our aim as for now is not to, is actually to look at, we can just collapse it here, is actually to look at the main content area. So this is the page content area, and we have the header here, h3, and a search bar. Then after that we have our graphs being displayed as from this point. So our first graph is a line graph, and the placement of each of these graphs is in a row, and inside that row we have a column whereby Bootstrap actually uses these styles where the class is column MD6 to actually resize our columns for the medium sized devices such as the PC to 6 columns. And since the entire row spans 12 columns, it will actually have 2 charts next to each other for each row. Then for the small devices it will also be 6 columns, and for the extra small devices it will be 12 columns. I think that can be seen here. This is for the medium sized devices, which the line graph covers 6 columns and the bar chart covers 6 columns. Then if we get to a small device, it will also remain as 6 columns and 6 columns. But if we go further and get an extra small device, then the width of our chart will cover the whole 12 columns. So that is what this code here stands for, and is the same for actually all our charts. So what changes in our charts is the h2 tag here, content, which shows the type of graph that you are drawing, and the canvas, I think it's here, this canvas here, which whose ID actually keeps on changing so as to show the appropriate chart. So for example, for the line chart, we actually have a canvas with an ID of line chart, so the line chart will be drawn within this canvas. So that is it for the line chart. Then we have for the bar chart, we have the same class, and it actually is in the same row as our first graph, which was the line chart. So we have the same class. Then the h2 tag content is bar graph. Then we have the canvas where I've given an ID of my bar chart, and this is where we'll have our chart being drawn. Then we move to the next row, and before that we have to run this clearfix div. Actually, you have to place this div with a class of clearfix so as to clear both the right and the left side of our document, any floats that might be occurring there or anything. So we have an h2 item of radar for our third chart, and the canvas as an ID of canvas radar. Then for the fourth chart is on the same row. It is the donut graph with the canvas having an ID of canvas donut. Then after that we have for the next row, the third row, we have a pie graph chart with an ID, with the canvas having an ID of pie chart. Then lastly we have a pie area chart with the canvas having an ID of polar area. So that is it for HTML. The next thing that you're going to do is to include our Chart.js file using these scripts here. So actually the script points to a source where I've placed my Chart.js, and for my case the Chart.js is minified, but you can actually have the one that is not minified, or you can just put the CDN files here and it will actually use the Chart.js, the online Chart.js libraries. So by this one line of code I have included that chat.min.js, and I'll be using it in my document. So after that I now start creating my charts here, and if you don't want to have your if you don't want to have the legend show on the these legends to show on the document, you can just use this like 3 lines of codes where we actually set the legend for the global document, actually for the whole document, to be false, and that will be the default setting for our chart. So maybe I'll just save it. I've saved it, so I can just refresh, and as you can see the legend that we had for our graphs, for all our graphs, actually have been set to false. But you can go to any particular, if you want one chart to show and the other one not to show, you can just go to that particular chart and choose and use the same script and set the enabled to true. So for my case I'll just apply a comment here and click save, then run again in our browser and see what we have. So let's get started with drawing the charts, and we will start with the line chart. So the line chart, I am going to specify a variable known as ctx, which will stand for canvas where the chart will be drawn. And to get the canvas where the chart will be drawn for the line chart, I have to go to get that element whereby I specify the ID for the line chart to be line chart. So I'm using this JavaScript function to get the element by ID, the element that I have in my document with an ID of line chart. So this is what is happening here, and I'm saving it as a variable ctx. So I'm going to use this ctx within the next, actually then within here, to draw the next set of code, actually this code here, to draw the line chart. So for the next line we are going to specify another variable known as line chart, and for this line chart I'm going to call and to draw a new, or call the new function and specify the function as chart. And for the chart I'm going to draw that chart on our canvas element with an ID of line chart. So after opening this function here, I'm going to pass in a number of parameters. I think it is the whole of these parameters up to here. So the first thing that I'm going to set is the type of chart that we'd like to have, where I'm saying the type is equals to line. If we want a bar type chart, we will just put here bar or spline. Maybe you can just try and see. I think there is an error somewhere. Maybe think spline was for the canvas.js type of files. Yeah, you can put any type. Maybe you can just say pi, and this is what we have. So for any type you can just specify the type that you would like for our line chart. So our type is line. We had actually changed previously to the pi. That is why we have this pie chart here. So for the line chart, I'm going to pass in this data here. I think up to here. So this is the data that I'm going to pass, and within this data I would pass two arrays. The first array will be for the labels, and the second array will be for the data sets. And inside the data sets we'll be passing an array of the data that will actually reflect, or actually will be linked to each label. So for the labels, I've specified the months, the first 7 months, or actually they are specified within this document, the first 7 months from January to July. Then after that we open the data sets, and we have two data sets which are actually is an array. So the first data set, and then here we have the second data set. So for the first data set, I'm specifying the label as my first data set, then specifying the background color, which is this color here with an opacity of 0.3, then the border color, which is this color, the same color with an opacity of 0.7, then the point border color, then the point background color, and the point hover background color, which is being set to white. That is when you point at, when you place your mouse over the point of at any particular point, the background color will change to white. Then we have the hover border color, point hover border color, which is a light gray with an opacity of 1. Then we have the points border width to be 1. Maybe we can just change that and see what we will have within our document. Just refresh it to return to our previous. Yeah, so this is the first data set, green, and the second data set is blue, and you can see which, maybe I can just set this border color to be a dark color so that it can easily be seen. So you can see now when we hover on each item or on each point, the background is white and the border is black with a pixel, with 3 pixels around it. So that is it for the setting of the colors for the points, the background, and the border. Then after that we specify the data item for each label. So we had 7 labels, that is January to July, and then we down here we specify the data. So we say the first data is 31, then 74, then 6, 39, 20, 85, and 7. And that is what we can see here. The first is 31, second is 74, 6, 39, 20, 85, and the last item is 7. Then after specifying the first data set, we go ahead and do the same as we did for the first data set. So we specify the second data set and we separate them by a comma. So maybe if we had a third data set, we'll just do the same, separate by a comma, then do a third data set, then maybe change the labels here, maybe just put some random item, maybe just do that. But the problem is that we'll be having the same colors clash. We can see this is actually our third data set that we actually created. So we can actually specify different colors here and different items, and then even put my third data set here. So this is my third data set. And that is it for the line chart. We can actually draw a number of lines and set various items or attributes for these lines, and even the border colors and whatever that you'd like to set. So that is it for the line chart, where we have set the type to be line, then specify the data, and within the data we have specified the labels and the data sets, where we have two data sets. From here, these are the two data sets that we have, the first and the second data set. Then after that, you're going to create a bar chart, whereby we start by doing what we did earlier, by specifying a variable ctx, which would represent an element within our document with an ID of my bar chart, which we specified earlier. And we are going to draw our chart in this canvas element with an ID of my bar chart. So we're going to verify the bar chart and we're going to give to verify to actually set a variable, my bar chart, and this my bar chart will be the chart that we'll be drawing. So for this chart, I'm going to specify a new chart which will be drawing on my canvas element with an ID of my bar chart. So for the new chart, I'll be doing within that element, and I will be using this code here. I think up to here, this code up to here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to specify the type, as we did earlier. The first one, we specified the type as line. For this one, we're going to specify the type as bar. Then populate some data into that bar chart. So we're going to populate this data here by first specifying the labels, or you can just say we are populating here the data, where we first specify the labels as the first 7 months of the year, that is from January to July. Then after that, specify the two data sets that we are going to have for our charts. The first data set, we can say we are going to represent the yes number of votes. So we'll replace the hash with the yes number of votes and the no number of votes, maybe in a referendum or something like that. So yeah, for the yes number of votes, you're going to use this background here, and for the no number of votes, you're going to use this alternate background. And we have, or you can specify like male and female. Then we have the data as shown here, where we have 51, 30, 40, 28, 92, 50, and 45 for the first data set. Then the data for the second data set is this one specified here, that runs from 41 up to 12. Actually 41 is 56, 25, 48, 72, 34, and 12 for the 7 months. So we should have actually all this for this array, for the data array in the data set. We should have the number of items corresponding to the number of labels, so as to show items for each label. Then after that, you're going to set some options for a bar chart, and those options is that for the y-axis on the scales, actually the scales of the y-axis should begin at 0. The ticks should begin at 0. So actually this is it. The options for the scales of the y-axis, the ticks should begin at 0. So you're going to set the beginning at 0 to true. So maybe you can just check here. So this, I think I'll just have to save first of all, so as to show our changes. Yeah, so it is now changing. This is the yes number of votes and the no number of votes, and we have our 7 months, and we have our bar charts for each month, and we can view, maybe we would like just to view the no number of votes, and then maybe the yes number of votes we'd like to view by, we can just click on the legend any item. Then after that, maybe we can just decide to remove these options. 2 3 4 2 3 4. So let's remove the options and see what we have. I hope that everything is correctly saved. So after removing the options, which we had the ticks to start at 0, we can see that our chart actually starts at 10 here, and that is because we actually did not specify it to start at 0. So it will start at a number which is almost close to the last figure that we had, which is 12 in our case. Maybe if we had this to be 22, then the chart would begin at 20. Yeah, and we can see that here. So actually, to avoid that, we just need to actually specify the options whereby the scales for the y-axis, the ticks should begin at 0. So the first tick, these are actually the ticks. For the first one, it should begin at 0, then move up to the highest number. So that is it for a bar chart. The next canvas with. So for the data, I will first of all set the labels and then the data sets. So the first label is dark gray, purple, gray, green, and blue. So that is it for our data sets. And since we have 5 labels, we are going to have 5 items for our data within the data sets. So within the data set, I'm going to specify the data items. That will be 5 in color. Then I'm going to specify the background color and the hover color for each label. So within the data set, I'm having 3 arrays. That is the first array for the data, the second array for the background colors for each label, and the third array is for the background color on hover for each label. Then after that, after specifying the element where the canvas will be drawn and the data that will be running the chart, I'm going to draw the canvas here. So I'm going to specify a variable which is the canvas donut, and within this variable I'm going to run a new chart which will be drawn on our canvas with an ID of canvas donut. So for this chart, it will have a type of donut, and then we'll choose the tooltip fill color, which I'll just show you shortly, which will be the color that will actually show on hover, and it has an opacity of 0.55 and a dark gray color. then we specify our data as the data that we set previously up here, this data here, or you can just copy this data information and just paste it here. So that is it for canvas for our donut, and this is the donut chart that we have. And as you can see, when we place our mouse on top of any item, we have this dark gray, or probably next to black color, and it has an opacity of almost 50%. So I think that is what we meant by this tooltip color. Maybe I can just, I'm not so sure, but maybe I can just remove it and we can see what we have. I don't know, we still get the same. Maybe the tooltip color was, we just need to find out more about that tooltip fill color, and we'll get back to you. So that is it for donut chart. Then the next chart is the radar chart, and we actually specify the canvas whereby the radar chart will be drawn as the canvas radar, or the element where the radar chart will be drawn. It doesn't have to be a canvas, it can be a div, but it should have an ID of canvas radar within our document. So that is it for that ctx variable. Then we specify the data, which will be a set of uh, which will be actually a set of um, the first one, which will have actually two data sets, a set of two data sets. So before that, we are going to specify the labels, where we have for the labels 7 items, that is eating, drinking, sleeping, designing, coding, cycling, and running. Maybe you can say these are the skill sets that we have. So for each skill, we would be having a particular data set for a particular person, or a particular maybe institution or something like that. Maybe let's say person. So we are having two data sets, and the first label I've put it, I've given it a label of my first data set. Then I've specified the background color, border color, the point border color, the background, the hover background, and the hover border color. Then I'm specifying the 7 sets of data that will correspond to each label. Then after that, I'm doing the same for the second data set. I'm specifying the label as my second data set. Then the different colors, the border color, the background color. Then here we have actually made some changes, or maybe added some colors that we didn't put here, such as the highlight fill and the highlight stroke. Then I'm having this data to represent each data item, or each label for our second data set. So after that, I'm going to create the new chart and draw it on our canvas with an ID of this ID of canvas radar. Then specify the type of chart as the radar, and then pass the data as this data that we specified up here, this data here. So by passing that, we create a radar chart. So this is the radar chart, and we can specify like running is 100. Yeah. Then this is the second, actually this is the first radar chart, and you can see we specified the points color. In our second, we didn't specify the point color. That is why we don't have points at the edges. but we could do that by probably adding those points. So we can just put point hover and point background. So we can just paste and see what will happen. I don't think I saved it. Maybe I don't know what's not happening. Maybe I can just refresh again. I think there's something that maybe I didn't get correct, or I didn't specify the point border color and the point background color too. So maybe I can just, before we hover, we should have our points set. So I think that was what was not making it. Yeah, so we now have our points, and we can try and change these points here. So that is it for our radar chart. The next chart, the second last chart that we're going to look at, is the pie chart, where we are specifying the canvas where we'll be drawing the chart, then specifying the data for our pie chart here. So actually previously we are starting with the labels, but here we are starting with the data sets. So it's just showing different, how you can just juggle up with the different items and choose which method that you'd like, maybe to start with the labels or maybe start with the data sets, but I prefer personally starting with the label so that you can put the data sets later. So for this one we are starting with the data sets, whereby we are going to specify the data sets. In the data sets, two arrays. The first array is for the data, where we are having 5 data items and background colors that will represent each data item and each label. So then for the legend, I'm going to give it a label of my data set. Then after that, within that legend, I'm going to give each item different labels for these data that we have here, and for this background they'll have different labels, that is dark gray, purple, gray, green and blue. Then after that we're going to draw the chart, and for this I'm using the variable pie chart to create a new chart and drawing it on our canvas with an ID of pie chart, then specifying the data as the data that we set up here. This data represent the data that we set up here, then using the type of pie for pie chart, then providing the options of having the legend to be off or to be false. Actually the legends would not show here, so maybe we can just have a look. So this is our pie chart, and we have the different colors, but we don't have a legend as is in the case of these other charts. So maybe if I just remove, or I can set the legend to be true, it will have the legend. So now I have removed that, and we can see that we now get the legend. So you can choose whether to have the legend or not, but personally I think it is important to have the legend. So that is it for our pie chart. Maybe I can just set back the options for the legend to be false. Then the next chart, which is the last chart that we'll be looking at for Chart.js, is this polar area chart, whereby you're going to get the variable ctx. We're going to set it as as the ID for the element with it's as actually an element then ID of polar area within our document. So that is it for this variable. Then I'm going to set the data variable, whereby we'll be passing the data sets and the labels, and we're doing the same thing that we did earlier for our pie chart. And within this, and after setting the data, we're going to create a variable known as the polar area, whereby we're going to run our new chart. So for the chart, we're going to print it on the canvas with an ID of polar area, and for that you're going to use the data that we set up here, which is the same data that we used for our pie chart. Then use the type as the polar area. Then we are going to set this option here, whereby we are going to say the option for the scale, the ticks should begin at 0. So maybe you can just look at what is being rendered on our screen. So this is the polar area chart, and we can see the ticks actually beginning at this point here, then moving to 50, then to 100, then to 150 and 200. And we have different sizes for the bar for our pie charts, showing different items. So maybe if we didn't put this to begin at 0, then it will begin at 50, which is actually maybe you can just, and you can see now our purple item is not being shown because it is at 50. And then since we did not set to begin at 0, then it will begin at 50, then to 100, to 150 and to 200. And to show that purple part, maybe I can just put its data to 80, and it will still begin at, I think it has changed, and it has begun at 80, which is the smallest item within our graph. So maybe I can just, yeah, I can just return the options for the ticks, for the scales of the ticks to begin at 0. So I'm setting begin at 0 to true. So for that, we will see now it will begin at 0, then to 50, then to 100, then to 150, and to finally 200. Yeah, and maybe we can just check how they actually appear. So that is it for our chart and the different types of chart that we are having. And this chart actually spans 6 columns here for our examples, and for this other example here they are spanning 4 columns. And when we go down to a smaller size, they are spanning 12 columns, and a medium sized screen they are spanning, or for a small sized screen they are spanning 6 columns. And that I think we can view it in this Chart.js2.html. I think it is not responding. It has now responded. So we go down to the point where we are having our charts, and this is it. So for the medium sized screens, we are using 4 columns out of the 12 columns for each chart. Then for the small size screen, we are using 6 columns out of the 12 columns for each chart, and for the extra small size screens, we are using 12 columns for each chart. Okay, thank you. I hope that you have learned a lot, and the next type of chart that you're going to look at is the implementation of Morris.js charts. Thank you.